In a world where the news feels bigger, louder, and harder to make sense of, Canadians need more than headlines. Hi, I'm Karen Ciolin, news reporter and host of the Big Story podcast. From world-shaping events to the everyday stories that spark debate, my team and I will explain what matters and why it matters to you. We're here to help you make sense of the news and give you the context you need for those kitchen table conversations. Trusted, Canadian-focused, curious. Listen to The Big Story wherever you get your podcasts.
Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F-words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, I'm a critic, consultant, and programmer based in Toronto, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Mark Jenkin, a Cornish filmmaker who specializes in stories about ordinary people experiencing inexplicable things. If you've seen Bait or Ennis Mean, you understand his unique cinematic approach, and you're probably very excited to see Rose of Nevada, which stars George McKay and Callum Turner as 2 men who sail out on a fishing boat and find themselves pulled into an entirely different life. It's been rolling across North America for a few weeks, and this Friday it docks into Toronto, Hamilton, and Vancouver, and in the UK, it's doing additional screenings with live musical accompaniment. It's a remarkable film. You should see it in a big theater. Mark chose Big Wednesday, John Milius' autobiographical drama about a decade in the lives of 3 young surfers, Matt, Jack, and Leroy, played by Jan-Michael Vincent, William Katt, and Gary Busey. Matt's the aimless one, Jack is the level-headed one, and Leroy is a maniac. And the film follows them as they go from teenagers in the early 60s to adults in the early 70s, through the upheavals of love and loss in the Vietnam draft, with the perpetual promise of renewal waiting for them in the surf. It was supposed to be a huge summer hit in 1978, but by the time it came out, the audience's expectations of a summer hit had changed, and it just sort of disappeared. And now, a handmade filmmaker from Cornwall is one of its biggest champions. How did that happen? Well, this is Someone Else's Movie.
I say this about a lot of films, but I think it's probably the film that I've watched the most. I'm here in LA as well, so although you're in Toronto, it seemed fitting. You know, it's an LA film. But the interesting thing is, I saw it when I was a kid, and I never realised it was where it was set. And so I grew up on the north coast of Cornwall within surfing communities, really. And I watched this film when I was very, very young. I think it was a friend's brother's friend turned up at the house with a VHS copy of it, and we watched it. And it just looked like, not necessarily our lives, but it looked like the life of a couple of generations above us on the north coast of Cornwall, and what we wanted to be doing when we were older, which was just hanging around on the beach and surfing and going to parties and stuff like that. And so I kind of grew up thinking it was like a Cornish film. And I'd obviously heard of America. I didn't know where California was. I certainly didn't know where Malibu was. I didn't know the history of, why the boards we surfed on were even called Malibu boards. So I think it's just, that film's always been part of me. As I was growing up, and I never thought of, and as I got into film and became a bit of a cineast, it was kind of separate for me, that film. There was all of the sort of, highbrow stuff that I felt I had to be engaging with. And then there was Big Wednesday alongside it. But I think as I got older and a bit more mature, I thought, actually, this film's a masterpiece. And when I was asked to contribute my top 10 greatest films of all time for the BFI Sight and Sound poll a few years ago, I spent ages coming up with a top 10. And I remember walking downstairs and Mary, my partner, saying, like, showing her the list, and she was like, "All right, great." She went, "Where's Big Wednesday?" And I was like, "I can't put Big Wednesday on there." And she said, "Of course you can. That's the film you talk about the most. That's the film you obsess about. That's the film that you watch over and over again. You know, so in your eyes, that must be at least in the top 10 of greatest films." So I've kind of, I think I've rethought about how that film sits in my sort of influence, but also alongside that, I think it's been that the film's kind of been reassessed a little bit as well, because it was such a bomb when it came out.
Massive.
And, you know, famously kind of, I think, was it with Star Wars and Close Encounters? You know, Lucas,
the story of the points. Yeah.
Kind of what it was known for was like this idea that Spielberg and Lucas were sort of embittered that Milius was taking stuff off, which I'm sure is a myth, or played for laughs. And that's kind of what it's known as. And also, I'm promoting a film now. You know, I'm traveling around North America promoting my film, and so I'm kind of dealing with all the marketing and stuff. And 1-2 Special, who are distributing Rosa Nevada in North America, are amazing, just doing this amazing job. And what I'm really appreciating is how careful you have to be in terms of marketing a film. And I think Big Wednesday was sort of a lesson in how you market a film, because it was marketed as a surf movie. So a lot of people didn't go and see it because they were like, "I don't want to go and see a surf movie." And then the surfers went to see it thinking there's a film about us, and then there's not as much surfing in it as they wanted. So it sort of, it didn't kind of satisfy anybody. But now I think it's like, no, this film is a great American 70s masterpiece that Tarantino famously said, "This film is too good for surfers," which kind of sums it up, really. You know, it was marketed badly.
Yeah, and the other thing too is the strangeness, looking back now, in 1978, of releasing a movie that I think had its moment. And this is because he couldn't get it made and struggled to put it together. But by the time it arrived, it was 5 years out of date. Right? I mean, Vietnam was over. The civil rights war was lost. the Summer of Love was almost a decade behind. And you have this epic, retrospective look at what life was like then. And I think the thing that fascinates me about it more than anything else is that when it is mentioned with Star Wars and Close Encounters, it's like, oh, but you know, this was obviously the one that wasn't going to work. No one thought any of them was going to be successful. That's what's so fascinating about this weird deal that they came up with. And Milius, a year later, is his reputation is recovered through the release of Apocalypse Now, which he wrote, and then he gets to direct Conan the Barbarian. And then this, looking back, people regard it as this weird stumble, but it is, I think you're right, it is his statement on all of the things that he experienced as a surfer. That's him. Sorry, I'm a little jazzed up on it because I just watched it again last night. I hadn't seen it since the DVD release, first time I saw it in widescreen, and that would have been the early 2000s. And it had been, so it's at least 20 years, maybe more.
Yeah, I mean, seeing the widescrreen version of it was kind of mind-blowing, because I remember having the VHS and it was letterboxed for the title sequence, and then as the three of them walk down the steps at Malibu, the bars disappear and it goes into pan and scan. And so I've got the VHS widescreen still in my studio. I've still got a VHS player. I haven't watched that tape for a long time, but I've still got the widescreen VHS. I remember buying that when I was at film school in Bournemouth over in the UK, and just going in and it was like when a VHS was sort of £20 to buy, and it was like, but to see the whole thing in widescreen and actually, see what you were missing, and it's never kind of action that you're missing, but just, I mean, that film was just should be seen in that way,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That was my experience with so many films when I was coming up too, but I think it was Jaws for me. And it was going from the original VHS release this is as archaic as it gets. It was not panned and scanned. It was simply telecinied from the center of the frame.
Yeah, amazing.
It made my heart hurt.
Yeah.
Then they introduced a pan and scan version that actually did follow the action, and that was better. And then the Laserdisc came out, and it was in scope, and it was just, oh, this is what is wrong with all technology.
Yeah, but then I saw I got the Big Wednesday Blu-ray when it came out, and then suddenly seeing it high definition like that, I saw so much. I was watching it with my friend Ed Rowe, who's the actor I work with a lot, and it's probably his favorite film as well, I think. And we were watching it on Blu-ray, and suddenly you see all the surfers doubling. And, there's a bit like the first time they're out surfing, it's like, who are these guys now? And it's like, oh, all right, okay, that's Matt, Jack, and Leroy, but being played by the doubles. And suddenly, so it's almost like there is a fine line. You want to see it as good as possible, but you don't want to see it. You want to see it kind of how it was intended on 35.
And
maybe
when it's big enough and far enough away that it doesn't really matter that there's so much.
Yeah, or there's a bit of grain or dust or scratches on the print that maybe hide the fact that there's doubles and stuff. But there's like a whole sequence where the pier is. I'd never noticed in the background of the pier there's like a massive bridge, like a railway sort of trestle bridge. And I was like, no, I've never noticed that bridge is there in the background. Of course, watch it again on a DVD, and once you know it's there, you do see it. But the Blu-ray, it kind of jumped out, and it was kind of distracting when I watched the film. But I was like, oh, that's really interesting, because now I've seen that trestle bridge, I can find out exactly where that was filmed. And I went on a real deep dive of like Google Maps, traveling up that coast, how far north of Malibu they went to get all of those locations. It was just sort of fascinating seeing all of that detail. And I was able to properly Sherlock Holmes it and find out all those locations.
I love it when people get into their movies this way. I do the same thing sometimes, depending on how long it's been in the rediscovery factor. Yeah. It's like, what is that? And then finding out this time through, I did the little bits of catch up here and there. The Bear brand, the surfboard brand, was invented for the film as a just a fake brand, and then it is now global standard. It took off and became real because people wanted the surfboards they saw in the movie. Yeah.
I mean, I know loads of people who've got Bear T-shirts all around Cornwall. Again, it sort of embedded that film in Cornwall. It was so confusing about what was real life and what wasn't real life. Let alone what was Cornwall and what was Malibu in my head. And I think that's why I love coming out to LA, because there's this thing in Cornwall when people kind of brand in Cornwall. And they call so the Cornish language name for Cornwall is Kerno. You'll probably know this with your links to the UK. But people nickname Cornwall Kernofornia. As if, and it kind of that kind of thing irritates me, because it's like a branding to sort of, get more tourists in or whatever. But I kind of do see it, I have to reluctantly say, I come out here and I was like, I can see the similarities between the culture here and certain pockets of surf culture within Cornwall.
Yeah, surf culture iterates all over wherever people are with that access to water and warmth, I guess. Although in Cornwall, it's not necessarily always that warm either, is it?
No, but I mean the sea temperature, I don't think it's far off what it is here. And I'm sat here in a hotel room in West Hollywood, and it's very overcast. I did because I'm on the road. I just tried to do a bit of washing in the sink in the bathroom yesterday, and I put the stuff out, imagining that by this morning it would be bone dry. And I went out and it's soaking wet. It's like trying to dry washing back in Cornwall. So I think even the weather can be similar.
Yeah, well, in Australia too, the replication of the ideals, maybe, if not the culture, that people are striving for communion, and that the water provides the thing. And this seems to be the theme to me to Big Wednesday, is that when they are in the water, they go back to who they want to be. Whatever else is going on in the world is left behind on the beach.
Yeah.
And you have this, it's not redemption, but it's almost resurrection every time. And that friendship that is not broken, but splintered over the course of the film knits itself back together as soon as they're wet, as soon as they're back surfing. Well,
I think it's about responsibility, isn't it? Because it sort of goes through three phases. At the beginning, they've got no responsibility, and then the second part is kind of running away from responsibility, And then the third part is accepting responsibility. And they all do that at different stages, like one by one, you know, and like the character of Leroy, you know, Jack is the first one to accept responsibility. It's kind of Matt's film in a lot of ways, although the perspective kind of changes within the film, which is really interesting as well. But Matt kind of organically, I suppose, accepts responsibility, but kind of he's the guy who doesn't go anywhere. You know, he stays there, and he at the beginning he's like the idol. He's the one who can do anything and go anywhere, and he's actually the guy who just never goes anywhere. Just becomes an ordinary guy in the best sense of it. You know, Matt's pool cleaning service, and he's the one who has a wife and a kid and a family, and then Leroy, you know, never accepts responsibility, but then you kind of know that right from the start. So, and it's always, like you say, coming together over the surfing, you know, and it's and he says, well, I can't remember the line exactly, but it's, you know, you still surfing, it's only when necessary. It's kind of, that's who they are. That's who they'll always be. And it doesn't mean they have to do it all the time. And that can be an allegory for kind of anything, really. And it's interesting because I recently read the novelization of the film. So, because it was originally like an article that then became that was going to be a novel, I think, originally, and then it became a screenplay, then it became a film. So they never wrote the novel, but then Milius and
Dennis Aberg, the co-writer.
So, but yeah, so then they went back and wrote the book, and I think it's kind of the original intended ending for the film is in the book, and it's really interesting because it's not like the specific moment where they rescue Matt because he wipes out and is in trouble, which I've always found is I don't want to criticize this perfect film, but it's slightly anticlimactic for me because you can't, you know, the drama of it isn't quite there. You know, you've got this huge day and it looks epic, but what actually happens to him? He isn't really rescued by them. He's helped out of the water. But in the book, in the novelization, what happens is he's on this right-hander down at the point. And the thing is, you've got to pull out that right-hander, else you'll end up underneath the pier. You'll end up underneath the pillars on Malibu Pier there. And in the book, what happens is he stays on the wave and goes under the pier and is almost drowns and is properly rescued from underneath the pier. And as an image, as a metaphor, that's great. Because that's like our hero not knowing when to pull out of the wave. But you couldn't have ever kind of set Big Wednesday, that big wave day at the point in Malibu, because that you wouldn't have that kind of huge epic day necessarily there. That's not the wave you get there. But the idea that he's just on this like right-hander and goes underneath the pier and has to be rescued by his friends because he doesn't realize when he has to stop. It's kind of, I think that would be a better ending for the film. But I always feel terrible saying that because
no. I see what you mean.
Who am I to say that?
Well, but it has a mythic element, right? I mean, it's Icarus and it's every other sports movie mythology about the guy who doesn't know when it's time to quit, because Matt hasn't destroyed his body, but he hasn't been kind to it either. He's the one with the massive drinking problem that he eventually gets clear of, but not in time. He's the one who gets clipped around in fights, and he's smaller than his friends, so he probably takes more punishment, even though he'll never admit it, which also presumably is the reason he is the way he is, because he's small and wiry. He's a great surfer, but he's also got the Napoleon complex going for him. Having him dashed against the posts is like it's hubristic punishment. And yeah, it would have been, I mean, also it would probably kill him. So maybe maybe there was no way to shoot it without it looking like it was tragic and lethal. Yeah,
I think they you know, it's a Hollywood movie that needs that big ending, and is him just not pulling out on a slow peeling right-hander. That's not going to cut it in the trailer when you're trying to sell the movie. But for me, who's kind of likes a more low-key finale to a movie, I kind of am always attracted to that. And the idea that, it's the pier, it's the man-made thing that kind of scuppers him. Because it was like what Milius talks about when he's talking about the movie is like, what had happened to Malibu by that time. They couldn't shoot there. They had to go up the coast. It had been commercialized. And that, in fact, those original pioneers who were surfing there were just like running across farmland to get to the break there, with people like trespassing on farmland to get there. There was no kind of human furniture in the sea or around the sea, and the coastline hadn't been commercialized and hadn't been made accessible to everybody. So the idea of that kind of wilderness lost, I think, works as well with the idea of him stuck underneath the pier while above there's, people eating or in the arcade or, whatever it is that's on Malibu.
Yeah. Oh, and you also have the sense too that the three of them have aged out, that they can't do what they used to do. And Matt injuring himself and limping away. It brought to mind, like, I was thinking of the end of The Swimmer, where Burt Lancaster is so completely destroyed and revealed to be old, even though he has been the same age the entire time we've been watching. It's like he starts out with this illusion of youth and vitality, and then just gradually, pool to pool, loses a little bit of his life force every time until he's left alone and broken. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I thought was so beautiful about the ending this time around, because I don't think I'd considered it, is that Matt is probably done, but he's helped out. Like, he's escorted home in a weird way. He's the last one left, and he refuses to take the easy way, so his friends help him up the steps that he stumbled down at the beginning of the film because he was just too drunk to navigate them. And now he takes them on his own terms, hobbled, but still standing. And there is just this beautiful elegiac quality to him.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the other thing that I love about the film is the symmetry of the beginning and then the end, going up and down the steps. Both times he hasn't got a surfboard. He's the person who hasn't got a surfboard. So he arrives at the beginning and he hasn't got a board. He has to borrow the beat up board. And then he leaves the board, having passed on Excalibur. He then leaves without the surfboard to go home. And it's like, on the surface, it's like, well, his surfing days are over. But the brilliant thing is that as the film plays in your head, after it finishes, he's got another board.
Oh yeah,
he'll be back. But that moment in the spotlight is gone, and that's fine. He's passed it on. He can now surf when he wants to, when he needs to. But he goes home to the family, goes home to normal life.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I wrote about the new releases of It Was Just an Accident, the drama They Will Kill You, and Epic, Elvis Presley in Concert, and subscribers to the paid tier got my exclusive reviews of Rose of Nevada, Gail Daughtry in the Celebrity Sex Pass, and Mockbuster in Friday's What's Worth Watching Dispatch. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io and get caught up. I'm a little torn too by the idea that he spends the entire movie trying to figure out who he should be, because Jan-Michael Vincent as an actor has this great prematurely aged, weather-beaten body and face. Like, he looks like he's been working outside for his entire life since he was the age of 3, maybe.
Yeah.
And his muscles are defined in a way that wasn't fashionable at the time. Like the abs and the 8-pack, that isn't something that happened until people had the equipment for that. And he just seems to have gotten it naturally. And so as a screen actor, he always fit weirdly into the 70s, especially when male bodies weren't that sculpted or shaped. And here, he and Katt are both surfers. Even before they got cast in the film, Gary Busey said he was going to go out and learn, and apparently did an absolutely horrible job of it. But it's so interesting to see him in this role. Like, he is the most beautiful person in the film from any angle, and he's the loser. Like, it's such a weird conflict, and I know Vincent wanted that. Like, he didn't let himself go bloated or stop exercising or doing any of the things he was doing because he needed to be in shape. But watching this guy whose entire reputation at that point is on his looks play a character who doesn't care about any of that and is bent on destroying his body and his soul when he's not in the water is so fascinating. Like that scene where, and it's clearly him, they couldn't afford a stunt guy, the scene where he goes out and plays Toreador with the oncoming cars and nearly gets clipped. It's an incredible stunt shot. And because it's 1977 when they shot it, obviously that's real. They didn't have any effects that could fake that. But the idea that he is willing to do this as an actor, like, to show that the character is so empty and desperate for something. And he was never given another opportunity to do that, which I find absolutely shocking. Like, how do you not capitalize on that, on this performance, unless, of course, nobody saw it?
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing, isn't it? They all kind of went down in the wreckage of the film, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, he is, yeah, like you say, like perfect. What a beautiful, beautiful guy, but with a real haunted look in his eyes, which comes from the man as much as the character. You know, you have to go somewhere within yourself to get that. There's the bit like when they go down to Mexico, they go down to Tijuana, the bit in the bar where the guy comes on to his girlfriend, and it's just like the look in his eyes, you know, that sort of rage. And then you kind of notice it comes back throughout the film. You keep seeing this sort of rage and sadness and despair. And then, you know, with what played out in the guy's life, it all becomes incredibly poignant, really.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, he's kind of there are those people who are sort of so beautiful when they're young and they can't maintain it, you know, naturally. That the body doesn't stay like that, you know. The face doesn't stay like that. And actually sometimes if you have that incredible beauty when you're young, when it begins to change and you begin to age, you know, you lose more than people who were never that striking in the first place.
Yeah. Well, it's that endless conversation now about, and this is a weird swerve, but people like Steve Carell and Jermaine Clement who are suddenly getting romantic roles because they kept their hair and they aged into interesting people. And it's not that they weren't nice looking before. I mean, Clement's incredibly distinctive. He's got this great beetle face. But now suddenly they're romantic leads, or they're able to be cast against much younger women without the audience rejecting the idea. And it is really simply, I think, that they didn't do anything to themselves. Yeah. They just allowed themselves to age normally. And now suddenly they look like they're comfortable with themselves, which becomes confidence, which becomes attractive.
Yeah, and maybe like the you know, being naturally funny as well becomes increasingly attractive as you go into middle age.
I should hope so. I mean, I have to hope so.
Whereas I don't know, you know, I mean, but you know, Jan-Michael Vincent, I think his comic timing is great. He was, you know, a funny guy, but it's all blinded by how beautiful he is. You just look at and it wasn't just the movie camera creating that. You look at some of the behind the scenes stuff from the shoot. It's just, you know, I mean, it's just the most beautiful film with the most beautiful cast. Yeah. And it sounds like a really shallow thing to say, but
but no, it has to be, right? Like, this film specifically is about the aesthetics of beauty, and both natural in the natural world and physical. Yeah, everyone is to some level attractive.
Yeah, and pure. It's a purity to it that's got to be there.
Yeah, well, it's California surfer culture. Yeah, right. I mean, there must be ugly surfers, but they never. That's not what the world wants from the image. So you have to play into the type of people who would. I'm getting convoluted, but the film has to create the image of the image, right? Like this is the kind of thing these people aspire to be, which is why they look like that, which is why they want to look like that. It's a feedback loop.
Yeah, and also I think it's subjective as well, because, you know, ugly, beautiful, all that kind of stuff. What does all that mean? I think it's just when people are sort of in the place they should be at the moment where they should be there, then it's just a beauty that people are so at ease. I mean, think of like Robert Englund in the film.
Yes.
You know, went on to be known as one of the most ugly characters. I know that was prosthetics, obviously, but a lot of that is in his performance as well. But what a beautiful soul he is in Big Wednesday. And as the narrator as well, you know, kind of being Milius within the film on a kind of confused timeline. Because at times you think Milius is one of the young Groms, one of the young kids.
Yeah.
Or is Milius the guy who takes Excalibur at the end, you know, the next generation? But then Robert Englund's character, Fly, is the actual narrator of the film. So has Milius put himself in there as a secondary character on the same timeline as the others, even though he was always saying that he was a generation behind there. So yeah, but they all, I think they all, you could take, except for on the male side, except for Jan-Michael Vincent, you could, and probably Bill Katt as well. You could probably take any of those guys out of them, and they could play pretty horrendous characters as well.
Oh yeah,
Gary Busey. Milius said he was, was annoyed with him because he was fat during the making of the film. You look at him, and go, wow, right. But he doesn't look good on a surfboard. He doesn't particularly look great in a pair of shorts. He's not conventionally beautiful, but in the film, all three of them are just perfect, beautiful Californian surfers.
Yeah, it's the charisma thing with Busey, because he is so fascinating. You just can't not look at him. And I remember when they cast him as Buddy Holly, and it didn't make any sense because he was bigger and wider, and his face was too big. Yeah. And yet, the second he steps on stage, it's like, oh no, he's a star. That's what you want. You want somebody who is changing the moment simply by existing.
Yeah, and that's what you pay for. It's the unfathomable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, how does that work? And you think, I don't know how that works. And actually, I don't want to know how that works, because that's the beauty of cinema. It just does.
Well, the sense too that Matt is the most charismatic and interesting of the three, even though he's also the most unpredictable, and like he's perfection on the water, but on land he's a complete disaster. It's such an interesting, easy contradiction, because William Katt, who is the most level-headed, would be the most handsome and most interesting person, except that this other guy is next to him. And then there's Gary Busey, who just comes up and steals the air from everybody else. And it's this alchemy of performance that I still like. Milius never did anything that interesting again with actors. Like, he just moves away from character study and intimacy as a filmmaker, and gets just, not that he made bad movies subsequently. I mean, I think weirdly Red Dawn is probably like the perfect 1980s Reagan era paranoid action movie for teenagers.
Yeah.
Because it just captures that moment of, I have a gun and I can fix everything that America was sold so horribly. And now it's curdled and awful. But in the moment, I mean, I saw that in the theater with screaming audience. They were completely into it. And it was a little freaky. But what he does with the human quotient of Big Wednesday, and matching those tiny, intimate stories against the natural world, and these incredible second unit shots, effectively. I mean, he bought surfing footage. It wasn't even his own. But it works because you believe that these guys would be the people in those swells and under those waves. And then the world rejected it, and he just sort of retreated. And yeah.
But I just think that the sort of reevaluation of it is fantastic. And actually, there's a couple of things that I've looked at from the time. So that Chris Pettit, who was writing for Time Out, a critic at Time Out, who then in 1979 made Radio On, which was also on my top 10 sight and sound list, possibly my favourite British film. When writing for Time Out in 78, he said that Big Wednesday was, I'm going to paraphrase him incorrectly here, but something like, he said it was the most important American film of the 1970s. I know Halliwell at the time, or no, not at the time, but a while ago, wrote that it was maybe the most important Vietnam film, despite not having a frame of Vietnam in it, And I was talking to somebody over dinner last night about it, saying that the amazing thing about it is you watch it with a bit of distance now, and I think it was too soon. Like you were saying, that moment was over. Nobody wanted to talk about like the death of the one love dream, and nobody wanted to really visit Vietnam. It was a long time before there was like Vietnam movies, wasn't there? And so it was like, but now it kind of, you watch it and you go, right, there's the ignorance of youth, the bliss of not knowing what's coming, what comes in adulthood and responsibility. But also on top of that, America at that time, you've got this ticking clock that's counting down to Vietnam that none of them know about, and we all know about that. And so you see the first section with the, just surfing in the morning at Malibu, then hanging around in the pit in the afternoon, and then the all-time hooter party, then a big punch-up with the jocks who turn up where nobody seemingly gets injured. It's all so innocent, all so beautiful, and you watch it thinking, you enjoy this. enjoy this because you only get this once. And then that brilliant little turn he does when they go down to Mexico, and you get that moment where kind of the same thing plays out again. They do the same as what they were doing in Malibu, but in California they do it. And again, it ends in a fight, but this time people die. And it's like, this is the wake up call. This is the start. This is like preempting, not just not middle age, but like, you know, what they're going to go through in their 20s. Yeah. Which is a lot different to what you go through in your 20s now, you know. But on top of that was just this big looming shadow of Vietnam, which is, I think now that's much more powerful than it was at the time, because people probably just didn't want to know about it, you know. I think it's the same thing with, like, say, with the pandemic or something, looking at the era around the pandemic in sort of 20 years time. It'll be so interesting. But at the moment, nobody wants to look at that, deal with it, because you haven't got the perspective on it anyway. But, you know.
Yeah. Well, this was something I did a podcast during the pandemic for my other job, my old job, about the pandemic and its effect, like sort of week to week on people in Toronto. And one of the things that I noticed was there was no culture. Everybody was avoiding it. TV shows were going back into production and ignoring the pandemic and just nothing. And everybody said the same thing, which is, well, people aren't going to want to think about it next year when this goes out. But if you look back at the flu pandemic of the late 1915s, 1920, there's no literature that acknowledges that either. We just collectively don't go into those rooms, I think, in memory. And it doesn't get readdressed. It gets readdressed much, much later. And what happened, I think, in Big Wednesday was that the people who first received it, the critics at the time, did think about it and didn't want to. Mm-hmm. And that rejection, I think, fueled, because now you look at the film and yes, it was made a little later and it was released in a year after Star Wars, almost to the day, May 1978. But it is a new American cinema work, and it would have been recognized as such. So it's bizarre that it was dismissed, but I do think you're right. I think they didn't want to talk about Vietnam just yet. And this is like weeks before The Deer Hunter comes out, and Apocalypse Now is a year away. And those films were in production, but they treated the war almost mythologically. Yeah. They abstracted things. I mean, Deer Hunter is fairly realistic, but it still creates this whole Russian roulette thing and this large epic story. And its grandiosity is in conflict with the experience that these guys have of it, which is that, you know, Jack comes back and doesn't talk about it. They bury Waxer without talking about how he died. He went to war and didn't come back. That's all we ever get. And there is this sort of cone of silence over the entire experience. Yeah. That I think sitting with that in a theater at that point in time would have been really uncomfortable in a way that works against the release of the surfing movie that you're supposed to see, or that you think you want to see.
And also there's another gap that I think it falls down through is it's formally maybe too conventional for the new Hollywood scene. You know, it's be like a John Ford movie. You know,
well, he did actively compare it to How Green Was My Valley, which I think also kind of worked against him with the audience at the time.
Yeah, exactly. And now that doesn't matter anymore, because what is conventional is, like, you know, a conventional movie in some ways now is unconventional. So, you know, I was reading reviews about the new Spielberg movie, and people saying, "God, it's very old-fashioned." And I think, oh, great, I'm up for a bit of old-fashioned at the moment, because make a change from new-fashioned. So, you know, that becomes irrelevant at the time. But at that moment, you know, did we want to see three sort of Greek Adonises walking down the steps into the, you know, and all of that kind of stuff? I think it fell through too many gaps. And it's kind of, it's scary, because I always think with my work, I think, right, well, it's follow your heart, follow your gut, do what you want to do, and there'll be an audience for it. If you make a film that you like, then there will be an audience for it. If you try and make a film for an audience that you're guessing about, there's a risk that nobody in the world will like it, not even you. And so that's what I kind of live by, is like, just follow your gut, make the film you want to make. But then something like Big Wednesday, which I think Milius did, that he did exactly that, but he was just unlucky that it just, you know, bad marketing, bad timing, just fell through. If every gap possible, it fell through. But luckily, you know, on the other side, I think it is being reevaluated and will be and it is increasingly held up as a great piece of work.
I think we're there, or we're almost there. Like someday there will be a Criterion edition, but not quite yet.
Yeah, I want to see a 35mm print of it. That's what I want.
I was going to ask, have you ever seen it in the theater?
No, I mean I've put it on. I put it on at our local cinema in Cornwall, but it was just a DCP. Oh, in fact, I think we had to screen. I don't think we could even get a DCP in the end. But yeah, I'm kind of talking to people who know more about the movie. And I mean, actually, I was speaking to somebody last night saying, we need to get hold of a print of this. We need, and I'd be happy to kind of take it on as something to kind of push and to promote. I mean, I'd love to kind of, I don't know whether I ever will, but I'd love to see a 35mm print of it. I'd love to present a screening. I know there was a print. It was shown in New York a few years ago, I think, and it was a print that was found in Australia. But it just seems nuts to me that these, there must be prints in places. There must be in the archive. They've got to, a movie like this can't be lost on 35.
My thanks to Mark Jenkin, whose new film Rose of Nevada is now playing in theaters across North America and opening in Toronto, Vancouver, and Hamilton this weekend. In the UK, it's playing some additional screenings with a live score, and if you can catch one of those, you should. Thanks also to Simi Kosa. She knows what she did, which in this case was literally saving the episode when my recording failed. You can find Mark on Instagram at Mark_Jenkin, and you can find Big Wednesday on Blu-ray and DVD in the Warner Archive Collection. It's also streaming on TCM and YouTube Movies in the States, and available to rent or buy on various VOD services across North America. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payup.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 40 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, and get all the boosters. I'll see you next week.